Have you ever considered becoming a person whose inner fortress is impervious to external influences? To have criticism, defeats, losses, and betrayals slide past without affecting you? Have you imagined the day when that hidden pain, that torment that gnaws from within, even when a mask of well-being is frozen on your face, finally subsides? Perhaps you are tired of futile attempts to meet the expectations of others, to maintain an image of invincibility that requires constant exertion, while the only desire is to momentarily free yourself from this oppression, to become invulnerable. But let me reveal a truth that may be kept silent. As long as you try to avoid pain, it will continue to dominate you. As long as you try to suppress feelings to protect yourself, to hide from the outside world, you will remain captive to everything that happens around you. Words that inflict wounds, actions that sow disappointment, silence that poisons the soul. This is not a sign of weakness, but a harsh reality familiar to most people. The only difference is that some are more adept at hiding their true feelings. In the annals of depth psychology, the name of Carl Jung shines like a guiding star, and he proclaimed that our essence is determined not by the vicissitudes of fate, but by the conscious choice of the individual. This is the cornerstone of truth. It is not about erecting impregnable walls around yourself, cutting yourself off from the world, not about donning the armor of indifference and insensitivity, but about accepting all aspects of your being, bringing to light what is hidden in the hidden corners of the soul. For true strength lies not in the absence of pain, but in a deep awareness of one's identity, even when wounds bleed. If the reader has reached these lines, it is not by chance. This is an appeal to those who are tired of causing themselves suffering with their own hands, who feel emotionally vulnerable, as if others have an incomprehensible power over their feelings. The author intends to show that such a fate is not inevitable, but it will require a courageous look at some painful truths. And perhaps for the first time, this pain will become healing. One tends to believe that the source of suffering lies outside, in the actions of others, in hurtful words, in experienced disappointments and betrayals. However, the harsh truth is that none of this has the power to cause pain if there is no unhealed wound already gaping inside. It is not what others do that causes pain, but what these experiences awaken in the depths of the soul, old unhealed traumas, the emptiness that one tries to hide behind a mask of strength, pride, and a desperate need to appear prosperous. It is this inner vulnerability that makes one susceptible to external influences. Carl Jung offers a deep understanding of human suffering, arguing that the pain we experience in encounters with the external world is an echo of unresolved internal conflicts. This view explains why some people are able to remain resilient in the face of the most difficult trials, while others break under the burden of minor criticism. The essence is not in the events themselves, but in how they resonate with our internal state. The unpleasant truth is that many of us subconsciously believe in the possibility of controlling the world's attitude towards us. We strive to be good enough, smart enough, strong enough, hoping that this will guarantee protection from pain and disappointment. However, control over the external world is just an illusion, and striving for it dooms us to a life of constant tension in attempts to foresee the unpredictable and avoid the inevitable. To free oneself from suffering, it is necessary to abandon protection from it. Instead of increasing control, awareness needs to be expanded. As long as we believe that our well-being depends on changes in the behavior of other people, we remain captive to their actions. True freedom begins with the realization that external factors gain power only when they find an internal response. The real battlefield unfolds in the depths of our unconscious. It is what remains invisible, incomprehensible, and uncontrollable that governs us. In the following sections, we will delve into this area to unlock the potential for genuine transformation. Prepare for a deep dive where the path to liberation from internal shackles begins. There is a common misconception that a person is entirely in control of their life. But when will the awakening from this illusion come? After all, in reality, this is far from the case, especially when an individual continues to exist in autopilot mode, mechanically reacting to external stimuli without realizing the underlying causes of their actions and experiences, making decisions that they themselves later torpedo. As Carl Jung astutely observed, until the unconscious is brought into awareness, it relentlessly directs a person's life, and they tend to attribute it to fate or destiny. This is precisely what happens to anyone unwilling to delve into themselves. All the pain, uncontrolled outbursts of anger, sudden surges of sadness. None of this is a random occurrence. These are signals emanating from those parts of the personality that have been forgotten, ignored, or suppressed. Jung called this terra incognita the unconscious, and it's not merely an amorphous collection of vague thoughts. It's a powerful active force, a whole system composed of memories, traumatic experiences, hidden desires, and fears that a person avoids confronting, yet which continue to shape their feelings and actions. Why do certain words wound to the core, while others remain completely indifferent to them? It's because those words hit a nerve, touching those sensitive spots within that are still bleeding. And they bleed because the person has never found the courage to face them, preferring to sweep them under the psychological rug, which they now constantly trip over. Carl Jung once remarked that transformation is impossible without acceptance, emphasizing that judgment only constrains, not liberates. And how often do people act contrary to this wise advice? They condemn themselves, suppress their feelings, force themselves to be silent, naively believing that this will solve their problems. But the reality is that the unconscious doesn't vanish with the wave of a magic wand simply because it's ignored. On the contrary, it forges a path outward, sometimes finding quite dangerous forms of expression, be it recurring patterns of toxic relationships, inexplicable acts of self-sabotage, or unbridled anxieties and fears that arise in moments of apparent well-being. There's no need to blame this on bad luck or the vagaries of fate. It's more like desperate attempts by the unconscious to reach the conscious mind, to awaken it from its slumber. However, the person stubbornly continues to remain in a state of oblivion. In seeking to protect oneself from suffering, it's important to realize that the key to relieving pain lies not in fleeing from internal conflicts, but in accepting and understanding them. Until a person knows they're unconscious, they will remain a puppet in the hands of their own emotions, twitching under the influence of unseen forces. And the more they try to protect themselves from external threats, the more vulnerable they become in the face of internal pain. But there is a way out, and it lies not in erecting defensive barriers, but in integrating all aspects of the personality. Becoming untouchable is not an act of resistance, but a deep self-awareness, allowing one to attain wholeness and harmony. What does it really mean to be an unyielding person? And why does this power stem not from armor, but from deep acceptance? Many believe that the only way to avoid emotional pain is to build impenetrable walls around themselves. They create masks, forge emotional armor, and try to convince others and themselves that nothing can touch them. They say, "I don't care, it doesn't bother me, nothing will hurt me." But deep down, they continue to bleed, corroding themselves from within. The real problem lies not in the feeling itself, but in the lack of understanding of what you are feeling and why. This only happens to those who have not yet come to know themselves. Carl Jung was absolutely right when he said, "Know all the theories, master all the techniques, but when you touch a human soul, be just another human soul." And this very human soul, which they stubbornly try to hide behind the image of a strong, invulnerable, and controlled person, desperately cries out to be noticed. Gaining emotional strength has nothing to do with coldness, ignoring pain, avoiding conflicts, or feigning indifference. It's about integration, about accepting oneself completely, about bringing to light all that has been buried in the darkness. It's impossible to gain invulnerability by isolating oneself from the outside world, erecting an impenetrable wall between oneself and reality. True invulnerability is born from the awareness of inner wholeness, from the understanding that no external influences can shake what is already firmly rooted in the depths of your being. By integrating the shadows of the past, suppressed fears, acknowledging one's shortcomings and complexes, a person gains the ability to consciously choose their reaction to what is happening, ceasing to be a puppet, pulled by the strings of emotions. This is true freedom. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the path of becoming oneself, understanding one's true essence, free from the expectations of others and the ideas imposed by society about what one should be in order to be recognized. Individuation isn't about striving for perfection, but rather a process of integrating all parts of the personality into a unified whole. It's not about trying to become better, it's about becoming complete. This is the secret often unspoken. The more desperately a person tries to escape pain, the more persistently it pursues them. The stronger their desire to avoid emotional wounds, the more fragile and vulnerable they become. However, when they find the courage to face their wounds, when they accept themselves entirely, with all their strengths and weaknesses, with the light and dark aspects of their nature, nothing from the outside can break them. This path requires considerable courage. The courage to look within, to abandon familiar masks, to allow oneself to feel because it is in pain that the key to transformation lies. The following narrative, we will reveal a surprising truth. Suffering, contrary to popular belief, can serve not as an enemy, but as a gateway to unlocking the true power of the personality. Let's delve into this topic without prejudice or fear. From an early age, people are taught to avoid pain. Perceiving suffering as a sign of weakness, tears are considered a waste of time, and excessive sensitivity makes a person vulnerable. As a result, people begin to avoid, deny, and run away from suffering. However, the more actively a person tries to escape pain, the more persistently it pursues them. Moreover, it can change its appearance, hiding under the masks of anxiety, anger, apathy, boredom, and even self-destructive impulses, the source of which remains unclear. Pain that is ignored does not disappear without a trace. It makes its way deeper and deeper until, at one point, it leads to unpredictable consequences. Carl Jung, a prominent psychologist, held a completely different view of suffering. He saw pain as a messenger of the soul, as an alarm signal coming from the unconscious. It's the language through which the self, the integrated personality, tries to attract attention. Jung compared depression to a lady in black, whom one should not push away. On the contrary, she should be invited in, offered a cup of coffee, and listened to attentively. However, instead, a person often prefers to force themselves to be silent, to distract themselves, to maintain a state of tension, and to dull their feelings. They do everything possible to avoid looking at what really matters. But what is the pain trying to show? What lesson does it carry? The truth is that painful sensations reach such intensity only when a person continues to fight internally. Within their essence, there exists simultaneously a desire for development and a desire to maintain the current state of affairs. Something within the individual persistently demands change, but the ego, committed to control, tries to suppress this call. It is in this confrontation that pain arises, because transformation, progress, and liberation from outdated beliefs are always associated with discomfort. Breaking with toxic relationships and saying goodbye to what has lost its usefulness represent a deep inner process of loss and rebirth. However, it is in this chaos that the opportunity for something new to emerge arises. When all internal structures are deconstructed, when confidence collapses and pain exposes vulnerability, a person gains the ability to see their true essence, freed from defense mechanisms, social roles, and masks. In this crucial moment, suffering takes on a sacred character, as it brings a person to their knees before the only thing that can grant liberation, themselves. Carl Jung deeply understood that suffering is not an unfortunate breakdown in the mechanism of existence, but an integral part of the human experience. Pain, in his view, is not a dead end, but rather a starting point on the path to individuation, to the unfolding of the unique potential of the personality. Unfortunately, many people, when faced with difficulties, prefer to retreat, failing to overcome this dark valley. They seek salvation in escape, distractions, and superficial pleasures. But if the reader has reached this point, it indicates their readiness for transformation. The next part of the text will examine in detail the process of this transition, revealing the path of individuation, which, despite its apparent loneliness and cruelty, is the key to true freedom. Only a few dare to embark on the path of individuation, and even fewer find the strength to see it through to the end. This path does not promise comfort and offers no guarantees. It does not protect the ego, but rather destroys it. Jung defined individuation as the process of becoming oneself, which primarily implies abandoning false notions about oneself. This process can be more painful than any external failures, as a person begins to realize that most of what defined their personality up to that point was just an illusion. A person is not their achievements, their traumas, or the image they've crafted to earn love, respect, or admiration. All of these were merely survival mechanisms, but survival isn't truly living. Individuation is a call to life beyond mere survival. It's the moment the unconscious begins to release everything suppressed, hidden, and distorted, revealing the person's true essence. The process of individuation, as Jung noted, involves abandoning the persona, that superficial image created to conform to societal expectations. Essentially, a person must shed their familiar shell to uncover their true self. It's on this path that one attains a kind of untouchability, not in the sense of emotional insensitivity, but as a result of trials endured. A person confronts their inner demons, acknowledges their weaknesses, shame, needs, and anger, and declares, "I see you, and you no longer have power over me." This inner clarity, this awareness of one's own dark side, bestows a strength that doesn't depend on external approval, recognition, or control. There's no longer a need to please everyone, win every argument, or appear omnipotent. A person gains a self-assurance that no one can shake. True emotional protection isn't armor concealing vulnerability, but an inner core, an integration of all aspects of the personality into a unified center of consciousness, which remains undisturbed in the face of life's storms. Pain may be felt, but it won't break the person. They won't lose themselves because they've ceased being a puppet of circumstances and have attained wholeness. They no longer skim the surface of life, but plunge into its depths. However, this immersion comes at a price: solitude. Not in the sense of physical isolation, but in the fact that few are capable of sharing this path. Most people still cling to superficial masks, fearing their own feelings. And when a person begins to break free, they inevitably distance themselves from them. But this distancing isn't an escape, but a sign of maturity. A person distances themselves not out of arrogance, but because they can no longer find refuge in their familiar surroundings. This leads to the understanding that consciousness serves as a kind of shield, as it is not physical strength, but clarity of mind that provides true protection. It is consciousness that is the state in which nothing has power over the individual. It's important to realize that no external circumstances can cause harm if a person understands what's happening in their inner world. Words will wound, failures will disappoint, and losses will derail until awakening occurs. Awakening isn't a sudden miracle, but a daily conscious choice that requires looking inward, even when it's painful, and taking responsibility for one's feelings, without blaming others, the past, or fate. As Carl Jung said, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms." Throughout life, a person resists the fear of not being good enough, the emptiness arising from rejection, the pain of loneliness, and the torment of feeling unnoticed. But what do they do with these feelings? Hide, remain silent, try to control everything, strive for perfection, pretend to be strong, which ultimately leads to an exhausted state, tired of fighting the world and themselves. However, it now becomes clear that true emotional resilience isn't rigidity, but clarity. It's not about creating armor, but about expanding consciousness. When a person understands their triggers, behavioral patterns, and emotional wounds, the actions of others lose the ability to destroy them. They still feel, but don't drown in emotions. They still suffer, but don't lose themselves, and this fundamentally changes the situation. True protection lies not in trying to shield oneself from life's storms, but in bravely plunging into their depths. Those who remain on the surface become defenseless victims of any, even the slightest, wave. But those who dare to dive into the depths will find there an unshakable calm, a source of inexhaustible strength and confidence. It is there that the path of everyone striving for harmony lies. When a person begins to live relying on inner integrity, awareness, and acceptance, the world may try to break them. However, all attempts will be futile, for there will be no vulnerable spot to